discussing theological truths for biblical living, reviewing featured coffee roast and premium brewing techniques. This is the Caffeinated Theology Podcast, bringing you biblical truths over a fine cup of coffee.
Well, thank you for tuning in today. Episode number 8, Caffeinated Theology. Kind of taking a little transition, a little break from talking specifically about the person and work of Jesus. But in actuality, we never really take a detour. And so even as talking about world religions, we'll talk about, dive into the topic of the work of Christ. It's kind of interweaving. But today, maybe we'll start out a little different. And I kind of want to ask Casey kind of what he's been up to, maybe over the past time since we met last. What have you been listening to, and what have you been drinking?
Caffeinated Theology.
Yeah, hopefully he listens.
What have I been listening to?
Yeah. What music have you been listening to?
I don't listen to a lot of music. Honestly, I don't have a lot of time to read, so I've been doing audiobooks this year. So I've been reading a lot more, and that my wife says that's not reading, but that's all I got. So
It's intake.
Fictionally, I've been reading, some fantasy books, but theologically, I read Fault Lines by Vodi Balcom.
Oh, okay.
A phenomenal work on critical race theory and its impact on the church, and also interesting because it gives a good perspective. He gives his perspective from a black man's perspective,
right,
but without the critical race theory involved in that perspective. Just
cool.
How he grew up and his testimony. And anyway, worth the listen.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with him or not, it's a good listen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's.
Well, we know what you've been eating: chitlins.
I've been eating chitlins and oxtail. There's a fantastic Jamaican restaurant in Rocky Mount. They have live Jamaican music and stuff at night, and I don't know what else, but their chicken is phenomenal. Their oxtail is delicious. They have this cabbage stuff. It's kind of spicy cabbage.
Oh yeah,
it's really good. So
cool.
Just try that up.
Well, Jason, what have you been reading and drinking? We know what you've been drinking, but what specifically?
Kind of my main, and I know this sounds kind of, I don't know if cliche-ish is right. My main spiritual reading this year has been mostly the Word, because I'm trying to read through chronologically in a year, and that takes up a lot. But I have been also listening to Mere Christianity on Spotify. I'm going through that again, and as far as fiction reading, I've been doing a Lord of the Rings book club with the Babylon Bee podcast, which is one of my favorites, and enjoyed that. My son's doing that too, so it's been kind of cool to be doing that together.
Cool.
Drinking all different types of coffee. Just finished up a roast that we reviewed a few weeks ago, the Yemen mocha bean, and it was really good. Roasted a geisha bean today. I'm not sure if that's what we're going to review. I think we're going to review that at some point.
Well, we've been drinking it, so that
I wasn't as happy with my roast on that. I did it a little too light, but it's been all right. What are we reviewing today?
We are going to review Black Rifle Coffee again. We have made the offer to our listeners. If you have a coffee you would like us to sample, we will do it and give a review on it. And so Mr. Thomas Barber, who has been on the podcast before, has given us a bag of, I can't remember right offhand what it is. It's a dark roast, and we'll be reviewing that. I haven't even opened it yet. It's still vacuum sealed, so we'll open that and sample that during our coffee segment. But
have y'all tried this Cameron's brand coffee? Now we buy cheap coffee. I know y'all buy
no, not all the time.
Well, we've been getting this, and we've been doing the whole bean and grinding it.
Yeah.
It's we've had the Hawaiian blend.
Oh,
and I don't know what else, but it's pretty good coffee.
Yeah. You might have to try that.
I'd be interested to know what y'all thought as coffee connoisseurs.
Right. Well, just what I've been reading is there's a book on church fails, and I've been reading.
That's different because we're always reading about the other side.
Yeah. So yesterday I mentioned the what's his name? Hippolytus of Rome.
Yeah. I was doing the sound for the live stream, and you stuttered a little bit when you said.
To remember
when you said that name, and all I could think of was it's an Adam Sandler movie, Big Daddy. When the guys he anonymous.
Yeah, I couldn't think of the news. I'm drawing a blank. I'm like. Hippolytus of Rome.
I was glad I was in a different room because I was able to laugh a little bit.
Yeah, he was the first recorded person to try to calculate the return of Jesus. So he's in the church. I've been reading through that book, and I come across. I'm like, well, that'd be pretty cool for, to try to highlight that point. And I've been reading this book called Tough-Minded Christianity, a pretty thick volume. By it's let me see, I had forgotten the author, but ironically enough, it's forwarded by Paige Patterson. But anyway, J.I. Packer, Gary Habermas, Erwin Lutzer, Russ Bush, and others contribute to it. So it's pretty. It's a pretty heavy volume. So I've been taking that in chunks. So.
We had a somewhat of a church fail yesterday.
You did maybe share that clip.
Yeah, I will certainly. Yeah. So tell about that. Like, what we got? Oh, okay.
So, yesterday we were preaching through Mark 13, and I was finishing up a series on last things, eschatology, which will be later down the road. For Caffeinated Theology, the return of the Lord, as prescribed in Mark 13. Jesus gives his disciples kind of an intermission before they press on towards Jerusalem, before he presses on to the cross. So it's kind of like an intermission, letting them know, be aware of the abomination of desolation, example of the abomination. Anyway, to make a long story short, I was in Mark 13. I believe it was around verse 34, and in that verse it's like, be alert, stay alert. Be on guard, watch. And Jesus uses this phraseology like 7 different times in Mark 13 to just make emphasis. Be alert. And right as soon as I'm reading the verse, the projector screen behind me just comes crashing down. You're talking about a 150, 200-pound screen rolled up, come crashing down. And obviously everybody in the church saw it coming, and I have no idea that it's rolling away. And by the time I get done saying stay alert, be alert, boom. And man, that woke up everybody in the church, and and so we pressed on. I mean, what are we going to do? Go back and roll it up, try to fix it? No, we kept on going.
We'll see if we can get that video. See if we can get it on some online compilations in between a drum set falling and
and some what is that song? The worship fails of the guy with the saxophone. Give thanks.
That's awful. Poor guy.
And there's the one where the girl's
key.
singing Oceans, and the drummer comes in and is playing like metal
That's
beats.
Animal.
You seen the one where the guy's playing the soft music, like while people are coming in, and all of a sudden it's like the Jeopardy theme song, and it's all quiet and worshipful, but it's the Jeopardy music.
Yeah.
I have not seen that. No, I have not.
Yeah.
I did see one where a guy was like, I'm gonna see if I can sneak the Jurassic Park theme in worship this week. And I mean, they're playing a song and the whole congregation singing, and in the background you hear,
Oh, Lord. Well, we're just having a good time today, just kind of chatting a little bit. But today we're going to talk about Islam. Last week, our discussion was on we were talking about world religions and cults. Last week, last episode, we talked about Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism. And I think we spent a good amount of time on both of those. this by no means is going to be an in-depth, investigative report from us. There's so much material out, where you can good material. As I mentioned last week, look for the publishers, look for the footnotes. If you come across a book on world religions and there's no footnotes, just put it up, just put it back up, and check your publishers. Maybe stay away from Wikipedia, that kind of thing. Because according to Wikipedia and things like that, there's no gray line. There's no, everything's kind of blurred together. But there are defining lines between world religions. And a good rule of thumb for me is what I've started doing, working through cults and world religions. I've got like a mental chart in my mind, or a little linear line, and I always try to chart where a world religion or cult fits on this line of works-based salvation, and try to chart it out like that. Does it fit on this line of works-based? And almost every world religions and cults fit that line. But today we're going to talk about Islam, and maybe we might hit on Hinduism a little bit. If not, we'll come back next week to chat about that. But stick around. We're going to grab us a cup of coffee and dig into the world religion of Islam. All right, so we're transitioning to the world religion, Islam. So I do encourage you to go back to episode 7. We do cover what we mean by when we say religion and cults versus how we as Christ followers define religion and how we define cults. So we do lay that definition out. But when we talk about world religions, I think you can't miss, especially in the world scene today, you can't miss Islam. And so we're going to probably spend a little bit of time on that today. Probably the predominant measure of our time today on Islam. So let's start out. I like to kind of brainstorm a little bit. When you hear Islam, what do you think of? What comes to mind just right off the top of your head when you hear Islam?
I mean, well,
religion
in our culture, and I know experience in life. I mean, I can't help but think of radical Islam. I mean, that's really, I know for me, was really the first time. I mean, I knew about Islam and Muslims and that kind of stuff, but the first time I really paid attention to it was 9/11. So to me, I can't help but think of radical Islam. And there's a big debate, and we'll get on this, but some people say, well, for the majority of Muslims, they're peaceful people. Mm-hmm. But that can be debated. I know I've heard it said if they're devout and follow the Quran, then they have to have some sort of I don't know if radicalism is the right word, but they kind of have to lean that way at some point. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into that, but that's the first thing I think of.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Casey? What do you think of?
Almost everything Jason just said, word for word, and part of that comes from because of what he said. I was kind of exposed to it at Liberty, and then of course 9/11 happened, and that was before Liberty. Mm-hmm. So 9/11 was the beginning of it for me. But then having studied it more in seminary and having met Muslims who, at least as far as I could tell, did not ascribe to radical Islam, there's such a question as to, okay, well, like you said, is it radical or is it devout? Are these people nominal Muslims, or they just have a different viewpoint? Mm-hmm. So, and then there's of course all sorts of little things that go on in my head too. But
because I went to school with 2 people in high school who were Muslims, and I didn't know it. I knew they were from somewhere in the Middle East, and that they had some sort of Middle Eastern religion, and that was kind of it. I mean, they were nice, peaceful people, but like I said, at that time, I didn't even know anything about Islam. So other thing I think about is like ritual, duty. We'll get into the 5 pillars, but particularly the praying 5 times a day. toward Mecca. I think of that. That's kind of one of the big things. If you ever see any kind of documentary or anything that's explaining a little bit of Islam, you're going to at some point see them get on their knees and face toward Mecca and do one of their 5 times of praying a day.
Yep. I think of, and maybe this is wrong, maybe this is kind of preconceived, I don't know, but I think of the devout Muslim with the bomb strapped on, running into public. And I know that doesn't characterize everyone, but the reason I think about that is we all here at this table believe in the eternal security of the believer. We believe when, according to Jesus, that the Father has given them to him, and as Scripture says, no man can pluck us from him, from his hand. So we ascribe to the eternal security of the believer. For the Muslim, the only assurance that they have in eternal security is if they offer themselves up as a martyr in death. And so that comes to mind. That's radical in its sense.
So I'll kind of flesh out that a little bit. Last week I linked a couple of videos that the International Mission Board and NAM did. I mean, it's back in the 90s. They're dated. That dealt with Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses. They also have one on Islam, and it's pre 9/11. So it's it's weird to watch it. They talk about radical Islam a lot, but it's really the purpose for it is for the American church. So they more focus on Islam, especially at the time in America, and they kind of talk about how Islam in our context is more peaceful. We don't have a lot of people here in America, or at least in like 1999 or 2000 when that video was made. In America, want to cause terrorism. Yeah. But one of the things in that video, they were interviewing some leaders in different mosques in America, and one of them was talking about how we try to serve Allah as best as we can, and but we have no guarantee of making it to paradise. We can serve him as best as we want, and then we just kind of hope when we die that he accepts us. And that is just completely different than what we believe. As you said, with eternal security.
I basically had a Jehovah's Witness girl tell me that once. We were going door to door, and we asked her, and she said, "I don't know." And she was fine with that and perfectly happy to say, "I have no idea if I make it in the resurrection, then if not, she really had no idea, no assurance or security at all."
Has she knocked on enough doors?
Yeah.
And Lord would say, "Yeah, you reach your quota." I'm not exactly sure if the Jehovah's Witnesses work like that, but
I was going to say she didn't even go that route. It was just like we asked her if she died, would she go to heaven? She said, "I have no idea."
Yeah. And I think maybe an effective way to and we're kind of going back to last week. I know we're talking about Islam today, but on that thought, an effective way to talk about salvation with a Jehovah's Witnesses is more ask them, if you don't know that, do you think if you die you're going to go to hell? Because their teaching is just annihilation. You just cease to exist. And maybe that can open up a avenue to get to the truth of the gospel.
Right, yeah. All right, so as we're studying Islam, we're just going to give a little bit of background. I think most of the time what people really want to know is not so much, the leadership and where it came from, but what do they believe and how do we interact? So we can go to a community college and you can take a course on world religions, and they're going to tell you some of the things that we're going to tell you as far as the origins and what they believe. But the reason that we do the podcast is we want to help equip the church in some way, equip Christ followers, but we want to give tools as to how to interact with, let's say, Muslims, or how to talk to people about the work of Christ or creation. And really, the podcast becomes a practical tool, practical theology in that way. And so when you talk about Islam, you have to talk about the founder, who would be Muhammad, and a fairly young religion considering that it was formed in 622 AD. And right now in the world today, as of this is a count that was gathered in the year 2000. So, and I believe it's growing. It's growing. Today there is, in the year 2000 there was around 800 million to 1 billion. So I think that's a pretty good count. 800 million to a billion, which is 58% that live in South and Southeast Asia, 28% in Africa, 9% in the Near and Middle East, and 5% other. In the U.S., estimated 6.5 to 8 million who adhere to Islam. That's in America.
According to LearnReligions.com, there are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world as of 2017.
So that has exceeded the 2000 count by, is that 500,000, something like that?
Around there.
Somewhere around there, yeah. So what is Islam? It is, it's described, the world's youngest religion, as I mentioned, 622. And of course, we're not going to get into the elaborate story behind, I believe it's called the Black Rock or Black Stone, back in 622. We're not going to probably get into all of the ins and outs of it. We just kind of want to really get to what do they believe and how do we respond with a little bit of background. Islam would be considered one of the world religions that would be considered monotheism, the worship, of course, of one God. In fact, they would accuse the Christian church, Christ followers, to being polytheistic. And so that is an accusation because of our belief in the Trinity, that we worship, that we're polytheists. And that, of course, is not accurate. Islam has gained momentum by coercion, and history will show that. Even today, renounce your faith. And another image that comes to mind when I think of Islam is ISIS. That's pretty prevalent today and in the news with Afghanistan and so forth. But I can't get this image out of my head of followers of Jesus on their knees, orange suits, bags over their head, ISIS behind them, beheaded for their faith. And that's the image that has, when you see pictures, it's just burned in my head, in my mind. And so Islam is radical or whatever. It's by coercion. And it's not a genuine faith in that regard, that you come to Muhammad or whether, it's a twisting of arm, and it's always been of coercion, conquer.
Yeah, I think
submission is part of the name. So
I think of different missionaries who have gone to Muslim countries, and you'll hear things like when people convert, they know that they're going to be ostracized from their family. They know that depending on the country, they might be killed for it, but they know that they're going to have some pretty major persecution because of their conversion. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were saying there.
Yeah. So they would use Deuteronomy 18 as kind of the proof text for that prophet, and they're looking for that prophet. They were looking for that prophet. Of course, in Deuteronomy, that prophet is the Messiah, is Jesus. But then they would say, no, that is Muhammad in Matthew 18, that prophet, that long-awaited prophet that they were looking for, conqueror, so forth. And so, they hold to the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, but they use it a little differently, of course. And
and part of that comes from you mentioned the Black Stone briefly. I think they call it the Kaaba. It's a place in Mecca that they believe was, I think they say it's where Moses worshiped. Maybe I may be wrong on the Old Testament figure that they say originally worshipped there.
Or Abraham.
Maybe it was Abraham. But
I don't remember.
this, they said, and this is interesting to me because we talked about this with Jehovah's Witnesses and with Mormonism, how they came out of somebody being frustrated with watching people really be hypocritical in their worship. Muhammad, when he was in Mecca, this place that was supposed to be a place of worship, where they believed, we'll just say Abraham was worshiping the one true God, or the one monotheistic God. At his time, he observed them worshiping 270 different deities at that place, and he got frustrated with it, and that's what sent him to the cave to start
collecting
the
Quran,
collecting his visions from which angel is it? I can't remember. Gabriel.
There's a passage in the Quran, and I'll see if I can't dig that up. I don't have a copy of the Quran on my Kindle, whatever, but there's a passage that speaks where Muhammad basically said, in essence, that he did not realize or understand that if the revelation that he received was from an angel or a demon.
Yeah.
And I think we know, but there's uncertainty even in
and kind of getting back to what you were saying about, they were looking for the prophet. Part of some of the teaching that Muhammad had was he said that Abraham and Ishmael,
yeah,
came back to where the Kaaba is and worship there.
Right.
So it's a lot of that belief system comes out of they believe that Ishmael was the chosen promised son, and whereas we believe it's Isaac, but in their teaching they said he came back to this Kaaba, and that's part of the 5 pillars of Islam is pilgrimage,
going to Mecca,
Mecca, and to go to that place.
It's interesting to me always how, because obviously we believe, based on what Paul tells Timothy, all of this is demonic, and all false religions come from demons, but that they always take advantage of and prey on someone who's dissatisfied with what they've seen in Christianity, but then they take that Christianity and distort it. There's always some element of truth in almost all of these religions, but there's a distortion or an addition or deletion, even in some of your more modern day false religions that are more subtle, like your prosperity gospel and that sort of thing. How there's truth there somewhere, but then there's all of these distortions that are added in.
Yeah.
Well, think about too, even their teaching of where Islam came from comes out of Abraham's distrust of God's promise. Him and his wife are too old in his mind, and it always comes out of a perversion, as you would say, of God's design and plan.
Yeah, it's interesting that how Ishmael, even in Genesis, is a promise given to Ishmael, that he's going to flourish, his families are going to flourish, but he's also given there's a prophetic word there, that he's kind of going to be a thorn in the side. And so you follow it even from Genesis all the way up, and you can see how that come to pass. And this is a word from the Lord, not a word from Muhammad. So there's no way a man in this regard can what you consider to be like a what do you call it when you kind of take a prophecy and you kind of make it your own self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no way that Muhammad, being a man, could have used this way and it have grown to 1.5 billion people. Yeah, and so
it's kind of crazy to think about. Islam in that regard may have been referenced
way back
in the word as being that thorn. That's kind of crazy to think about that.
Yeah. All right. So the holy book that they use is the Quran. And have y'all ever read any of the Quran? I read bits and pieces. I've never read the whole piece all the way through, but
I've got one. I've not read the whole thing.
Yeah.
I've referenced it.
I've never read it. I took world religions in college, and we had some excerpts of it we read, and I've in different stuff kind of leading up to this, trying to do a little study, just different parts of it, but I've never read chunks or anything like that. So
we went to the because the last class I took at seminary was a practicum, so we didn't sit in the classroom and learn about religions. We went to them and asked them questions about
that's good.
their faith. And so we went to the Islamic Youth Center in Raleigh, and it was really, really interesting because, of course, some of this you've referenced in your notes, but they talk about how, the Quran is in Arabic. Our translations are not the Quran.
That's
even
right, yeah.
translations that they gave us that day.
That's right.
The Quran's in Arabic. And so there was one girl who was, she was a teenager, and you could see them, and she was at a different level because she was literally memorizing the Quran in Arabic. I mean, chunks and chunks and chunks of the Quran in Arabic. Another thing we learned about the Quran is they made note to us that, of course, this was in the class part, the follow-up, but, if we're going to minister to Muslims, we don't need to go with our Bibles marked up in ink and highlighter and that sort, because they do not write in their Bibles. Their Bibles are holy, and if they see you disrespecting your own religious book in that way, they're not going to listen to you.
Culture is a culture.
So you want to go with an almost pristine Bible.
Get out with the big Gutenberg.
Right. But the respect and the honor that they bestow on that book is really important. So I wondered even how many Muslims are going to listen to a person with an English translation of the Quran. So I would think with our missionaries, that's another reason it's so important for them to know Arabic, so they can actually come to them with their own scriptures.
That's interesting because they don't, like, if you are reading from an English translation of the Quran, they do not consider you reading the Quran unless you read it in Arabic.
They consider it a paraphrase if it's any kind of translation.
Yeah, they don't. You're not a worshiper, I don't guess, but and so that's good too to think about culturally. How far do you go when you memorizing? Do you bring a Bible with you? Do you use the word Allah? That's been a big debate. That's a big debate. Yeah. Do you use their word for Allah? And how far do you go to Now I can't answer that. Whether you use the term Allah, because it means something different to them than it does for me.
Yeah, because you'll have some people say, well, that's just the Arabic word for God. But I've heard, Muslims who've come out of Islam to Christianity even say, yes, it is the Arabic word for God, but it has connotations. Just like when we say God, it has connotations. I would think that's true between any religion. You can use the word God, but God for the Mormon has connotations and presuppositions and all of that with it. So that's really problematic.
I would have a hard time using Allah. And if you want to use the argument, well, it's just a translation for God, I would say, well, then I'm going to use Yahweh and Yeshua and be very specific. Because of, like you said, the connotations that go with,
it's a proper name. Yeah. So even in Arabic, if you were to, it's like if you had a proper name, like in Spanish, they didn't have a Spanish name for Larry, I don't think. So my Spanish name was like French. My name was Raul. I chose that name. But if somebody they would Larry, or whatever. And so if I'm talking to say an Arab and I want to stress that fact, I'd probably use Yahweh. I wouldn't use Elohim because that would probably raise flags. Yeah. Because it is in plural. I would use, Yahweh. That's the national name. So Larry.
Larry.
So, but the Quran is like, it's nowhere near the the length of the New Testament. It's probably the size of the New Testament. It is 4/4 the length of the New Testament and divided into 114 surahs or chapters. And so you're not going to be looking for chapters, books. Like I thank the Lord for whoever, well, for us having chapter divisions. Sometimes they do get in the way, but they certainly help. They certainly help us read, but you won't find it broken up like that in the Quran. And again, you mentioned there is a reverence for the book, for the Quran, and I mean I think we should revere God's word too. But going back to like writing in your Bible in the margin, I don't see anything wrong with that, because that's actually.
I was thinking of it more from an evangelistic standpoint.
Right.
Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it either.
Yeah.
But if you open up your Christian Bible and they see marks all in it,
they're not
going to listen to you as well as they would if you,
I
it's
got
purely
you.
from an evangelistic standpoint.
Yeah. And so, again, they wouldn't, like if we read it from an English translation, they wouldn't, well, they're not worshiping, Allah. They're not reading it in the Arabic. So on my timeline in my head, or my linear line I got in my head, we're not going to draw a chart. We're not going to bore you with that. But on the works-based realm, every word religion we try to put on this line somewhere, whether they're works-based, and we'll talk about here in just a moment, what's considered to be the 5 pillars. So we're going to talk about these in just a moment, and we're going to try to lay them out on this chart. How does a person become a good Muslim? All right, and what do they have to do to be a good Muslim? Even being a good Muslim will not guarantee them eternal life, as we already mentioned. But what does a Muslim have to do to be a good Muslim? Okay, and these are what they're called the 5 pillars.
I will say, in a very general sense, I heard one scholar say that you must be a good Muslim 51% of the time. Literally, the scale has to be tipped in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know how much that idea varies across different communities of Islam, because like the one I was referencing earlier was the guy was pretty much saying we have no way of knowing. We try to do enough to please Allah and hope He accepts us. So I would be interested in that to know what the if it's some people think 51, make those scales tip just enough, or if you gotta have a big variance or whatever.
Maybe it's 5150.
Oh yeah, Van Halen.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say on that note, like, I don't know if you're still, but I mean, we kind of think of Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, but we look at Christianity, it isn't even like that. You can't say Christians believe.
Yeah.
From an outsider's perspective, I mean, we're split into a million
there's no doubt that there's some of that probably in all world religions, but in Islam in particular, because I still think even today the majority of anybody we may run into around here that's Islamic is not looking to be an extremist.
Right.
So I mean, and even I remember in world religions, and I hope I get these two right. There were the two sects, Sunnis and Shiites, and they had vastly different ideas.
And there's a third, which is the Sufi, and the Sufis are like the mystics.
There's always that group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
we have them too.
That would be like
in Israel, Kabbalah, like the Jewish.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like in the early church, it would be Gnosticism. Yeah. So it's really the Sufi, and they're really looked down on. And not only that, and we probably won't talk about it today, but the Nation of Islam. Yeah. You talk about some wackadoo.
See, I'm not really familiar with the Nation of Islam.
The Nation of Islam. That was when that Malcolm X and what's the guy's name who started it? There's somebody before Farrakhan in like the 30s, and it became a thing for fighting against racism, and
like a liberation
theology kind of deal. And when he died, it went away for a little bit. whoever took his place, I wish I could remember the names.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever took his place was actually trying to bring it back toward more traditional Islam, and that's when Farrakhan came in and was like, no. And it kind of actually split the Nation of Islam. And the ones who were trying to go back to more traditional Islam, they kind of assimilated into Islamic communities, and then the Nation of Islam really got its prominence in the civil rights movement and all of that, with Louis Farrakhan and Malcolm X. And
They've
all
kind of
that.
adopted it.
Yeah.
So to really get off, not another direction, but really think about it in this way. We look at Jehovah's Witness and we would say, well, that's a cult. Mormonism, that's a cult. Then Islam, of course, is a cult. But then they look at the Nation of Islam and say, that's a cult.
Yeah.
That's a cult from,
Well, that's true. Even like within Mormonism, I mean, they look at certain sects of Mormons in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I guess every religion has their
bastion.
cults within a cult.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 pillars that are. We'll just briefly talk about them. So pillar 1, it makes me think of. So pillar 1 is what they call the Shahada, but try to say that 6 times fast. But Shahada. Well, it automatically makes me think of Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema. And so I'm going to read that. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." And then and then it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your might." Well, in Islam, the first pillar is the Shahada, which is the declaration that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. So it's like a confession, and that seems to be pretty easy for any Muslim. That should be probably the easiest pillar, I guess. And like we would say in the Romans road, what people consider to be the Roman road, confession. Confession is important. Really, all of Romans chapter 10, where you believe in your heart and confess. That's kind of the verbiage there. I believe that could be very similar here. It's sincerity in believing what you're saying as you're voicing it. But as we say, a person's sincerity, whether or not a person's sincere or not, doesn't equate truth. And so that is the first pillar. It's the Shahada, and it is voicing that confession. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet.
The Islamic Center of Boulder talks about the Shahada. And there's another thing that it talks about. That's the basic sincere recitation of that is your entrance into the Islamic faith.
Yeah.
But then the Islamic Center of Boulder talks about it also being a covenant that the person makes with Allah, that he or she will continue to obey Allah and walk in the footsteps of Muhammad. So it's more than just a recitation. It's you're covenanting with Allah to obey and walk in the footsteps of the prophet.
Yeah. So would we put that on the works based? I mean, overall we would, but would we put that individual pillar on the works based?
I don't know. That's kind of gray. I mean, it's like you said. It's kind of similar to, we make a confession or, declaration of faith, and if it stopped right there, maybe it would definitely be.
It would be close to the line
on your timeline. It would be a lot closer to less works based.
Yeah.
But because of what we're about to talk about in these other 4 pillars,
they follow.
It becomes clear that it is works based.
Yeah. Pillar number 2 is what we consider to be the praying statute or pillar. That is praying 5 times towards Mecca, or the Salat, and that comes with ceremonial washing. One would have to wash themselves. It reminds me of like the scribes. It's very reminiscent of that, washing ceremonially before you would transcribe the word, or the priest would wash before ceremonially, preparing for worship, that kind of thing. And that's the same idea. And so I really don't know. I don't know any people who are Muslim, and I certainly haven't seen this in practice. And I've seen several folks who I would identify, they're Muslim, but I've never seen anyone like bring a rug in, or, I don't know how that looks.
Yeah. Yeah, even I mentioned I went to school with two people that I found out later were Muslim, but I really think it was a lot of it was cultural.
Yeah.
Their families were Muslim, because I don't ever remember seeing them do any of this prayer. And what are the times they do it? Sunrise, noon. So at noon, we were in school together at noon. I never remember any of that ever happening. So I've never actually seen that either.
Right. Midday, sunset, and right before bedtime. So you got a bedtime prayer.
So it says here, sunrise, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and prior to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You ever seen anybody a Muslim pray?
Not in person, no. Only in movies and.
Yeah. How about an Old Testament figure that comes to mind?
Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Daniel praying 3 times a day. But Daniel, and we talked about this last Wednesday night in our Bible study, was pretty much making a point. Not only making a point, but just seeking God, seeking the Lord. And it wasn't anyway works-based. But would we put that on the work-based line? Having to pray a certain amount of times a day?
I mean, I think it all comes down to whether or not, and it's the same for us. I mean, are these pillars salvific, or are they an expression of faith? And as if Jason was saying earlier, even if you're good the majority of the time and you still have no guarantee, I mean, it's still a works-based religion, but is it?
Well, yeah.
Do these things provide an avenue of salvation, or the possibility of salvation? Where
if somebody didn't pray 5 times a day, would they be ostracized or not considered a good Muslim?
Well, you just kind of hit the nail on the head, I think, Casey, with all of this. With that, you have to keep that idea in the forefront that all of this, they're trying to be a good enough follower of Allah for Allah to accept them. Mm-hmm. So if that is what's behind all of this, then it's absolutely works-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, pillar 3 is almsgiving. So we would maybe an easy way to translate that to the church would be if that you have to give a tithe or an offering in order to be a good Christian. And even though most Southern Baptist churches today might say amen, that's not part and parcel to being a good Christ follower. I think we ought to give and whatever. But for the almsgiving, it is that you are to give 2 1/2% of one's capital wealth to the poor, and for the propagation or the spreading of Islam. And so whatever you make, you give that 1 and what is it? 1 and
2.5.
2.5. Yeah, 2.5 for the spreading of the propagation of Islam. And so it would be like a tithe and offering given to the poor. And I mean, I've known churches where people in those congregations, now of course, trying to make a parallel here, where a person would write a check or whatever for a great amount of money, give to the church, and you know that person never made a profession of faith. They don't have fruit of regeneration at all, and they're writing that check out as a way to say, well, maybe this will appease God. Maybe this will be my penance.
Yeah.
So in the same way, maybe there's a parallel there.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say there's a parallel anyway for me, because there are people, we might not have pillars, but I mean, there are some that if you're not giving 10% of your money, you might as well be lost. Like, they don't say it in those words, but I mean, if you had to put our thoughts and our beliefs into pillars, the giving that 10% might just be one of them.
What is the pillar? What is the pillar of the the Broadman hymnal fit in?
It's one of them. It's one of them. I actually had a guy came up to him and pointed at the Broadman hymnal and said, "This is the reason that our church is dying. We've forsaken this book."
Oh, really?
And it wasn't the Bible. It was the.
Well, anyway.
It was, but anyway, we're getting on.
So yeah, we know there's kind of those.
Can I just say this? And I thought this from the very beginning. We were talking about jihad and all that.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's really easy, and of course anyway, it's really easy for us as Christians to be like, those Muslims. Mm-hmm. But if we're honest with ourselves and we look at the mistakes and the false teachings and all of that, we can see our own propensity to go in that direction. We see some of the same issues, not the same beliefs necessarily, but the same issues in Christianity, even to the point that the Crusades themselves have been called Christian jihad.
Yeah.
At that point, Christianity, as false as it was at that point, was no better than, it was conversion by coercion, manipulation, and all of those things. Yeah. So, I'm not saying, I'm just saying we can do the same things with our own beliefs and religion, and even still, like distortions of Christianity are also demonic. So,
right. Yeah, that's right. And it's funny you mentioned that because I'm leading a small group of young adults in Sunday school. Well, I consider it to be a discipleship, small group. And I said, well, what are some of the topics that you guys might want to discuss? I kind of let them pick it, and we kind of work through some things, and they come up with some really, really good topics, and things to work through. And one of them was, of course, world religions. Which I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. But then they mentioned the Crusades. I'm like, okay, where's this coming from? And I said, well, if you want to study about the Crusades, I've got to tell you, just be prepared to be angry at the early church. Yeah. Be prepared, as we're reading through, to be angry at things that the churches did over the years during those times. And so, yeah, it just reminded me of that when you mentioned. Yeah. Pillar number 4 is what is considered the fast. And during the month of Ramadan, a fast would be observed from sunrise to sunset. And traditionally is nothing will pass over your lips during this time. You refrain from any sexual interaction. So it's a fast. Now, we have fasts like that, too. Most of us, when we think of fast, we think of not eating. But, of course, for us as Christ followers, you could fast from anything that's become an idol. You can fast from whatever. But specifically, food and sexual relations or whatever. But I've kind of seen the not end result of this, but so I'm doing this thing called an intermittent fast. All right. And it's not really, I'm not fasting to pray, and it's different than that. So some days I'll have a 24-hour fast, and when that 24 hours is up, I've got to really kind of not gorge myself with the food. But I have seen during Ramadan where Muslims would fast during this 24-hour period and go out and feast.
Well, I think that might be part of it.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's been a long time since I took that class, but I feel like I remember the when the fast is over for the day, it's a big celebration.
Yeah. But I'm glad that Casey mentioned that there's how we have that propensity to distort too. Yeah. And we can be on this line, because I remember working with a guy one time, and I walked in, and this guy was a new believer. Okay, so young in the faith, and I walk in, and I said, "Man, what in the world? Why the long sad face?" He said, "I'm fasting." I said, "Well, you just go over and get you a snack, because the words of Jesus, and I did it in a fair way. I said, just go ahead and eat, because you're walking around with a long face, letting people know you're fasting. The whole point of the fast is not to walk around with a long, drawn out face and I'm fasting, oh Lord, water, but it's to, it's for you to refrain from the things that have become a distraction, and it might be food, whatever, to spend it in prayer. And I said, you've already blown your witness there, and it just made me think of that.
I was just thinking, all of these these are good things. It is good to acknowledge that God is one. It is good to fast. It is good to pray and be committed to those things. It's good to tithe. That's just Satan's way to take good, godly things and
that's right.
Just tweak them. Just tweak them. Even the way that Islam looks at God and even Jesus. I mean, they revere Jesus. They have great respect for Jesus as a prophet. Even but he's not God. You know what I mean? So,
and that's what makes these all distorted. And we mentioned this, anywhere a religion or cult that distorts the person of Christ. It's always, who is Christ? Is he the centerpiece or not? It's not Muhammad. To them, Jesus is just another prophet.
They are really, really strict on God being one. They really think the idea of the Trinity is a great blasphemy and heresy. It's because they have a misunderstanding of what the Trinity is. But to say Jesus or Muhammad, either one of them, is anything other than just a man who God used or Allah used as a prophet. To say anything other than that is like one of the worst sins that a Islamic person could commit. I think I forget the terminology they use, but they to attribute anything other than one singular attribute to God is very detestable to them.
All right, the fifth pillar in Muslim way of life is the pilgrimage to Mecca. And since Muhammad taught that the Kaaba was the original place of worship for Adam and later Abraham was there, that every good Muslim must make a pilgrimage there. And I begin to wonder, what do they teach about that if a person can't make it?
They say that's okay. The kind of the phrasing they use is, if you are financially able, I don't think they say financially, but if you have the means to go, I think that's what they say. If you have the means to make the pilgrimage, you're expected to make it. But again, on the same line of thinking, of works based and trying to do enough works to have Allah accept you, that if you having the means to go, it still kind of puts the poor at a disadvantage because it's just one less thing that they can do to please Allah.
It's really kind of like the idea of the sacraments in the Catholic Church. There are some that are required, but then there are, the more sacraments you can participate in, the better that is for you.
Right.
But you do have that divide between these are required for everybody, but these are good if you can. That kind of idea.
I was just thinking about that with the particular pope, and I can't think historically who it is, but was not a pope. It was a Catholic. I can't remember who it was right offhand, but wanted to be baptized, was on his way to be baptized, and died before he got there. And so what they said, well, his sins would be absolved because he had the intent. The intent was there. I can't remember historically who that was, but it just made me think of that. So the intent was there. Maybe that's the same idea. Well, I intended to go to Mecca, and I had good intentions, but didn't just quite make it because I didn't have money or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that would probably be, they give them a pass on that. All right. What do y'all think about grabbing some coffee and coming back?
That sounds like an excellent idea.
Okay, let's do that. Let's grab some coffee. Okay, so today We are sampling Black Rifle Coffee Company. This is the second time that we have reviewed this roaster.
I think the first bean was the thin blue line,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a dark roast also.
And we've said that if anybody has a roast that would like us to sample, that we would put it on air, and that means for any bean you send to us, we will do our best to sample it. This is from our friend and brother in Christ, Thomas Barber, who's been on podcast before, and he wanted us to sample this particular dark roast. And the description on it is, sit sail with this majestic dark roast, and upon your journey you will find a smoky aroma and a robust flavor with hints of baker's chocolate. It is a blessing for one to have a hand in determining their own coffee. Explore the unknown with Blackbeard's Delight. And that is what this particular roast is. Blackbeard's Delight, a dark roast from Black Rifle Coffee Company. And we are going to drink on this and talk about Islam for a little bit as we wrap up today's podcast. All right, so we did want to thank Casey for joining us today. He had to run. He was actually on call, and he got called away. And so we are thankful for Casey's insight. He's going to be on future episodes with us here and there. And so we're going to thank Casey for his insight to the world religion Islam. And again, he'll be joining us in the future for future podcasts. But returning back to Islam, we're going to drink on this coffee and kind of wrap up things, some thoughts on Islam. What I did want to talk about are some specific doctrines that Islam believes or holds to. We've kind of talked about a few of them already. They believe that God is one. He's not triune. They believe in sin, but they don't necessarily view original sin like we would, or human depravity.
Yeah, they don't consider the state of mankind fallen. They more say that we are gullible, almost like what's the word that they use? Forgetful, easily deceived, or weak.
Yeah.
But not fallen in nature. They wouldn't say that, which is in stark contrast to what the Bible teaches, what we believe, that it's in man's nature, in our fallen nature, to sin.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the New Testament is very clear that before Christ, we're slaves to sin, and we're fallen, and sin is our master. It's what controls us. And the Islamic belief would not hold to that.
Right. So, final judgment. What happens when a person dies? Again, we mentioned that they're not in the Islamic theology, that there really is no eternal security unless one dies a martyr. Final judgment, that the world will be judged at the end of time by Allah. The good deeds and obedience of all people have 5 pillars and the Quran, and that will serve as the basis of their judgment. Okay, whether a person is a good Muslim, whether they follow the Quran and the 5 pillars, they're in a balance, they're weighed. And so that was what they would believe about final judgment. Salvation is determined by how devout they are. That's part of their final judgment. And it's by compiling good deeds. Again, on that timeline, on that line, good deeds and doing something, to be a good Muslim, and to escape some final judgment. All right. So a big one in the Islamic faith is marriage as well. There is kind of this dark underbelly to Islam that sometimes is not mentioned, and you don't see it in mainstream news. You don't see it a lot, but there is an underbelly of and hopefully we don't get in trouble for this or called Islamophobes or anything like that. But there is an underbelly of womanizing and even homosexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the womanizing thing, you bringing this up made me think of it. I actually witnessed an example of this a couple of days ago, Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
We're recording on Monday. It was just 2 days ago. My wife and I were running some errands, doing some shopping. We were heading into Walmart, and I saw what seemed to be a Middle Eastern couple, walking in around about the same time we were, and the lady was dressed in head to toe, covered in all of the traditional Islamic covering.
Yeah.
And then the man that was walking with her, he was dressed in ratty t-shirt and jeans and flip-flops. And I just remember thinking to myself, we hear all of this social justice and tolerance and equality, and that is just the opposite.
Yeah.
That was a practical what I witnessed there and saw.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of women's rights and equality.
Right. Not only that, but there's, as we mentioned, there's this coercion. That Islam would overtake by coercion, and marriage allows the husband to have up to 4 wives, and so by overpopulating a demographic or a place, you are taken by force in a way. You're overpopulating an area, and that's why you would find that a man can have up to 4 wives. Mostly they would hold to a monogamous relationship, but the 4 wives are part of overpopulating, like with polygamy, with the wives populating their own planet. It's kind of the same idea. They overpopulate a place, where we as Americans sometimes we have lost the idea of having big families, and we have like people with only children. They don't want to be burdened down with a lot of children. Where Muslims, they would have 19, 20, kids to overpopulate a place.
Yeah, it's kind of as you said, like to coercion by numbers, and even some of the foundings of Islam kind of had that undertone. When Muhammad kind of led the movement to spread Islam in the Arab world, the religion side of it was there, but a lot of it was political and taking over areas politically. And then after they would take them over, they would declare, Islam as the faith. Yeah. But really, I hate to use the word. I don't even know what word to use, but just the movement and the spreading early on had a whole lot to do with politics and really tearing down what led him to start the movement to start with.
Yeah. All right. So we've often said any world religion, you have to know what they believe to respond to them. And I've had conversations with Muslims before, and one of the 2 top things that they would say to me, number one, is how can there be 3 gods? Well, obviously we don't believe that. And then they would say, well, how can God become a man? Of course, in the person of Jesus. That's the 2 things that they would often address.
And that goes back, we're talking about the doctrines of Islam, for sin. The most serious sin that can be ascribed to people is that of the shirk, which is considering God as more than one, and misrepresenting God. So that's why that question is really the first thing when you start talking to a Muslim about the Bible. Right. Those are, like you said, those are the first 2 things they're going to come to, because that is the number one biggest offense to their belief system.
So if you ever talk to a Muslim in Middle Eastern context, separated from Western thought, if you start talking to them about Christianity in America, they have visions of Baywatch, Madonna, more sense of Catholicism, way of thinking of Christianity. They don't think of the Orthodox, disciple making premises of Christianity. They don't think like that. They think of this overindulgent culture, Madonna, overly sexual sense of Christianity. That's what they think of. And one of the first things to do when interacting with a Muslim is try your best, if you can, to dispel that myth. Not all Christians are like this. That is bad. That is not what Christians believe or hold to. In fact, some people today wouldn't even, if you're talking to a Muslim, they wouldn't even call themselves Christians. They would, they're Christ followers or followers of Christ. And so you got to understand the context a little bit. Are you speaking to a Muslim in America who probably already understands a little bit more about the culture? Or are you speaking to a Muslim maybe in Iraq or wherever it might be? And, you talk about the person of Jesus, who is Jesus, because he or she defines Jesus different than what we would. To them, he's more than... He's just a prophet. To us, he's obviously, he's obviously God, and died on the cross for sin. But their next thing would be, they acknowledge Jesus, but how can God die? That's a question I get a lot, not a lot, but interactions. How could he have died?
Yeah. And that's where you really have to get into the doctrine of Christ being fully God and fully man. That's not a bad question, really, because that's, like you said, that's probably the next most common one beyond the Trinity and how can God become man. That's probably the next question you're going to get, and that really is almost. I mean, it's not low hanging fruit,
right?
But it at least automatically puts you on a path toward the gospel of being able to explain and try to flesh out how we believe that Christ, he set aside his place in heaven to come as fully man and fully God to intervene for us. And it's a way to get you there.
Yeah, I used that phrase yesterday in the sermon, and I kind of battled with using that terminology because I didn't want people to, I've had people tell me before, keep it simple. It's like, well, there's nothing wrong with using terminology as long as you explain exactly what it is. Even in the sermon yesterday, it was the hypostatic union of Christ, the union between his divinity and his humanity. And to explain the tension between both. And we say that the Lord Jesus inexplicable can't understand the depth of that fully. And I think if you can convey that somewhat to a Muslim, I think you might find some footing there. Yeah. But just think about it like this: if you're witnessing to a Muslim, they are just as devout in their faith as you are. And so if you are unprepared, unless the Lord just take over and lead it.
And I would also say, like you said, unless the Lord take over and lead it. If it's the Lord's will, he will. But I'll also say, think about, and we've had these discussions about ourselves. Think about how you have grown in your theology and your understanding, and maybe some things in the past, that I believed that maybe weren't exactly right, and the time process it took
to get there,
to kind of get to correct thinking, And if we're talking to someone who is just as devout in what they believe, most of the time it's not going to be a one-off gospel sharing and they convert right there. If it's God's will, it'll happen like that. And like we said in the past, we rest in the fact that God does the work. Right. But for the most part, practically, it's going to be a process of sharing what we believe, and trusting the Holy Spirit to do the work over the process of time that the Lord deems is right.
Yeah. Right. There's a certain degree of the Lord leading and clearing out some of the baggage, which is that process.
Yep.
Tearing away some of those preconceptions that we kind of hold on to.
Yeah, and there are you hear stories. It's usually from people on the mission field of a radical transformation from a one-time gospel experience. But even most of those have something in those stories where the person is like, I've been having these dreams.
Yeah, you hear that often.
And, it's these dreams that are obviously from the Lord, that if it's not Christ himself, it's something leading them to when this missionary shows up and starts talking about Jesus, they're like, that is these dreams I've been having. You always hear that you hear those almost across the board with conversions from Islam to Christianity that are from a single witnessing, especially overseas. That's you hear that a lot.
Right. So witnessing to Muslims, and you kind of, systematic, you got to learn their culture, learn their beliefs, as I think Casey mentioned, earlier about the Bible and the sacredness of the Quran to them, and just learning things culturally. But if I was to hinge anything on witnessing to, what I would hinge it on would be to pointing out the centrality of the person and work of Jesus for salvation. That would be where everything else would hinge. All right, so a Muslim might want, a devout Muslim might want to take it another direction. You come back to the centrality of Jesus. They want to take it to Ramadan or whatever, take it back to the centrality of Christ. And if you do that, I think I think the Lord will honor your conversation. The person might not become a believer, but I think the Lord will honor your attempt as being faithful to rightly exclaiming Christ to a Muslim. So I think that would be, if there would be one thing about witnessing to Muslim, I think that would be the one thing. Keep it simple, know the culture, and hinge everything on the person and work of Christ, which is really what we've been talking about over the past few episodes anyway.
Yeah, and I think, in doing that, you point out the really the assurance of salvation that the Christ follower has.
Yep.
I can't say because I'm not a Muslim, but I would think that there would be some unsettledness in the heart of anyone who follows a belief system where no matter what they do, they just cannot know. They just have to hope that they've done enough. And when you're confronted with the assurance of Christ did it all on the cross, and we can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if we're in Him, that all of our sin is forgiven, and we literally have the righteousness of Christ placed on us, and we know that we're going to be with the Father in paradise. And I think that can be something that the Lord could use to really draw someone out of a faith like that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap this up about Islam. We can probably go on and on about Islam, but again, if you want to witness to a Muslim, you got to learn their culture. You got to learn their beliefs.
Yeah, and I will say too, on all of these, we're by no means experts, and I'm sure that I've said something that may not have been completely all the way accurate, not on purpose. I know last week with Mormonism, I was talking about how they can, or one of the practices they have is they will pray dead people into heaven, and I was a little off on that. The premise was right, but it's actually they do something called baptism of the dead, where they will get a devout Mormon to come in and be baptized on behalf of people who have passed away. And they say that gives that person the opportunity to become a Mormon post-death. So the premise was right, but it was a little bit off. So when we asked for a little grace there, if some of this stuff that we've said is not 100% but we have tried to do our research and make sure what we're saying is accurate. And one thing, like you said earlier, really our main point here is to equip believers to be able to talk about their faith with today with Muslims, and in doing that, we want to just have a general understanding of what they believe, and how we can really talk about our faith in relation to what they believe.
Right. Yeah. Well, what do you think of the Black Rifle?
I thought it was okay. I've gotten to where I just don't drink a whole lot of dark coffee anymore. I tend to drink medium, maybe medium dark sometimes, depending on the bean. But it was for a dark roast. It was pretty good.
It was.
So it has a bit of an earthy taste, but it's not overwhelming. I'd give it a 3 out of 5.
I don't know. You think it had maybe something to do with the pour over? A lot of pour over has that. Maybe it gets that little bit more of a earthy tone to it, but. I would give it a 3. For a dark roast.
I've had some dark roasts here lately that I'd just not drink coffee. If it was all that was available, I would just get a cup of water.
You have to water it down. Right?
But if this was the only thing on the shelf and I was wanting a cup of coffee, I'd probably make it and have a cup of coffee.
It ain't. I mean, for a dark roast, 3. That's where I'm at with it. And you can definitely taste the smoky aroma. But I think that's any dark roast is going to have that.
Yeah, it's not overpowering though. We kind of joke about a lot of dark roast tasting like an ashtray.
It doesn't.
And I wouldn't say this one tastes like an ashtray, but it does have a hint of the smoke.
Mm-hmm. And it's really good for a dark roast. So, Black Rifle Coffee Company, especially for those who might be looking to give to a cause for law enforcement and firefighters and those type of things. This is veteran owned, so that might be something that you're looking to invest in.
And I will say this is the third Black Rifle product that I have had. We did the Thin Blue Line, which I kind of gave a middle of the road.
Yeah.
And again, that was a dark middle of the road on that, middle of the road on this one. But in a lot of convenience stores now, they're getting pre-canned coffee, Black Rifle coffee. And those, I had some of those when we were on one of our mission trips with our students this summer. And they were really, really good.
Yeah.
I usually don't like...
well, how would you compare that to the Starbucks?
That's what I was just about to say. I usually don't like the pre-canned coffee. I don't like the Starbucks. I don't like... big convenience store around here, Sheets. They have a line of it. I don't like their pre-canned stuff. Monster has one or two. There's just a kind of a weird little aftertaste that all of them have. And the Black Rifle one, it didn't have that. It just tastes like a good.
Right.
It tastes like a good iced coffee.
Okay. Yeah. Well, cool. Next week episode, I think what we'll do is kind of give a quick overview of the Big Five. I don't want to really invest. I don't know any folks who are involved in Buddhism, or at least around here, or maybe even for our listeners who might be Hindu. So what I want to do next week is kind of give an overview of the Big Five, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper to the New Age movement and spiritualism. I think that's a very interesting topic.
I think that's getting more and more prevalent too.
Yeah.
We want to be a practical podcast to equip the church, and I think, at least in our context, that's something that we're going to encounter a lot more.
The New Age movement and Buddhism, they will interlock in places. So I think that will be effective. And really, if you're a Star Wars fan at all, you should be able to see the link between Buddhism and the New Age movement.
Yeah, and I think maybe we can get into kind of the fallacy behind trying to compare a lot of modern movies with Christianity.
Sure,
I've heard Star Wars
Yeah.
used. The Matrix is one of them.
Yeah.
And I kind of get sometimes where people are coming from, but that's not. It's not the purpose of those movies.
Yep.
I've seen there's a devotional and Bible study from the Star Wars movies, and then I remember after the Rise of Skywalker came out, I saw a book advertised on Facebook about the Rise of Skywalker devotion, and I'm like, you're not even using a good Star Wars movie. At least use a good one. Not
Right. So that might be a good episode down the road, is to do a few movie reviews. And my wife, she gets upset with me sometimes watching movies because I like to dissect them more than probably overthink them more than what I probably should. And I can't help it. Part of the expositor in me exposits, movies. And so I'll mention the plot 30 minutes or, into the movie, and it happens. She's like, shut up.
Yeah.
And so I like to look at movies through that context of, okay, all right, how as we as Christ followers, how are we to decipher culture, and art and so forth. Yeah. That's one of the things that Francis Schaeffer was known for, is taking culture and art and music and looking through it through the Christian lens. I'll never forget this, reading his book, reading a piece from Francis Schaeffer, how the artist Pollock, I believe was the name, who would do a lot of random artwork, and he'd have contraptions that were, hanging to paint cans and a canvas below, and he would swing the paint, and it would make these random, the whole point was stressing chaos in art, and that there's no design to it. But the man had to design the whole piece, to fixate his. Anyway, it's good to look at that kind of stuff, and I think that might be a good future podcast.
Maybe we can do that episode in between this season and next season.
That'd be good. Yeah. Anyway, we'll come back next week and wrap up I don't know if we'll wrap up, but we'll come back and give a quick overview of some of the big 5 world religions, and then dive into New Age movement or spiritualism. Join us next week, Caffeinated Theology, over a fine cup of coffee.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope today's discussion has encouraged and challenged you. Please join us again next week as we discuss biblical truths over a fine cup of coffee.